There we go. Okay, so here we are once again. Let me know if you guys can hear me. Should it be working? We're here every week or weekend, Sunday, 11:30 to 1:30 California time. So this week, as always, we're answering questions, hanging out. So let me know what questions you guys have, and we will answer them. And go through some recent comments. Oh, yeah, that's one that I should probably address because I don't want to type out a big long response. There's a comment from a user with the name Stupidity Delivery Service, which I think is an awesome name. But I want to address this really quick because I didn't want to get into a long text explanation, so I was putting it off so I can just explain this here and point them in this direction. So this person said, your videos were such a huge help to me in understanding the rhythm. And this was on the vowel eating video, which I can link here. So if you want to know how to eat your vowels, that will teach you how to do that. I say I've struggled with it for quite a while, talking about the rhythm. And finally, things are beginning to look up. My first language is Russian. So I've said before that Russian speakers probably have an easier time. I don't think I've said that specifically, but Russian is stress timed like English. So the timing of the language works. It's the same type of system. I don't actually speak Russian yet, but that's what it's labeled as. It's a stress time language like English. Now, that doesn't mean it works in all exactly the same ways, right? There's different ways that different languages handle the specifics. But it is a stress time language compared to, say, Spanish, which is a syllable time language. But this person says, my first language is Russian, and I totally disagree with you on Russians having the upper hand to understand English speech. To me, Spanish is so much closer and easier to hear than English. When I studied Spanish, I could hear almost everything they say, even in a fast manner, and I still have so many issues with hearing English. So that makes perfect sense because all of the sounds in Spanish are essentially a subset of the sounds in Russian, meaning that Russian has all the sounds that Spanish has, but it has more sounds than that. Spanish is relatively limited in the number of sounds it has, especially vowel sounds. There's just the 5 vowel sounds. I mean, you can make diphthongs and stuff, but it's just a combination of the basic vowels. So that to me would be a much bigger reason why this person would understand Spanish a lot easier than English, because English has many sounds, Russian has many sounds. A lot of the sounds in English and Russian are different, where a lot of the sounds in Russian and Spanish are either the same or very similar. So that's probably why. In addition to that, I think that it's easier for your listening, especially your speech also, but even your listening. If you're going from a syllable time language like Spanish to a stress time language like English or Russian, it's probably going to be a lot more difficult to start understanding, even if the sounds might be similar, because syllable timing gives about the same length to every syllable. So you more or less clearly hear every syllable, and then you just add stress to some syllables. Where in a stress time language, the timing is different. It's focused more on the stress syllables, and then the unstressed syllables tend to be kind of out of the way. Again, different languages handle it differently. I'm sure that English has some specifics that, like maybe with this vowel eating, maybe Russian doesn't eat vowels. I don't know. But regardless, if you're going from a stress time language like Russian to a syllable time language like Spanish, then it would make sense to me also that just based on the rhythm, because each syllable is more or less the same length, it's probably a little easier to hear and understand. And so that could be another reason why Spanish is a little easier, where the ways that English handles the stress timing compared to Russian might additionally throw you off as a Russian speaker. So that's the way that I would explain that. Then they also said, thanks to your videos, I can hear much more, but there's still a lot of questions. For example, how can I lower my intonation to make the unstressed words quieter without eating the vowels? For example, in cartoons, characters usually speak pretty clear, but their intonation always jumps up and down as well. Or how can I keep my intonation raised if I see a lot of one-syllable stress words in a row? So this shows perhaps a little bit of misunderstanding of how things work. So when we're talking about vowel eating and the rhythm, obviously intonation is part of that, but we're just talking about like the basic rhythm of the language. Intonation, which I'm making the lesson for now, it's not about lowering the intonation. You don't want to lower the intonation. Okay, there's a difference between stress or unstressed and intonation. Okay, they're not the same thing. So that will be explained in the upcoming lesson. So hopefully that answers the question for that person, and I can just link them here. So in the chat here, curly hi from Heidi. Heidi. How do we say Haiti? I think we call it Haiti. I want to say Heidi because I'm sort of mixing like the Spanish and the English pronunciation, flapping the D there. I think we just say Haiti. Yes, welcome. I don't know if it was you, but I know there's someone that came here before and they said they were from Haiti. So welcome. Yeah, always like to see different people here from different places. Let me know if you have questions. Fernando. Hi, is this sentence grammatically correct? Well, I think we have a typo there. Phone, not foam. The phone was released at a price of $120. Yes, it is 100% correct. I don't know if you just want to, maybe you thought it was correct and you want to make sure, or maybe there's something about it that you're not sure about and you have a question about. Definitely let me know, and we can maybe discuss what's going on there. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with that sentence. Perfect. Let's see here. Any other recent comments that could be useful here? Yes. Okay. So on the video for the lesson for the Y sound, started playing and my intro. Here we go. Okay. So this is the lesson for the Y sound. Loose and loose pronounced the same. Well, Luce, I'm not, that doesn't seem too familiar to me. Maybe as like a short form for Lucy, which is already a short form for Lucille, as in the name, Lucille, Lucy, Luce. But yes, it would be pronounced the same. Of course, Lose with only one O is lose. The S changes to a Z because, English is awesome like that. But yes, these two are pronounced the same. Very good, and welcome, Mr. Anderson or Miss Anderson. I don't know. Anderson could be either way. No sredna. Welcome, our backwards Russian name. Yes, that is what you are. You are a backwards Russian name, apparently. Okay, so on the Y sound lesson, and guys, feel free. I'm just trying to fill up some time here at the beginning, talking about recent comments. Stack up the questions, stack up the comments. We can jump into things. But on the Y lesson, the other day, JC De La Rosa commented. He had a question. It says, in words like cute, view, human, etc., would that be considered a small Y sound? Because in those words, I feel like it sounds more like the linking Y than the Y as in you. Hope you can clear this up for me. So the way I explain that, because this could be very useful for a lot of people. For those of you who don't know, the small Y is what I call you can think of it like the linking Y in a way. So that's like if you go from say E to any other vowel sound, the Y is kind of right there. And so we don't get a full Y, but we get this sort of like small Y sound linking the two vowels. So if I say he, um, I don't know, he is, not he is with like a yeah with a full Y, but like he is, yeah. Just a small little Y because it's right there. Or if you go from which would only happen at the end of A or I, into a vowel. So like I am, I am with a small little Y, etc., etc. That's what it's usually used for. But this person is asking, like in the word cute, human, view, um, is it that small Y where it's not like full, or would it be a full, like Y, like in you, yes, yikes, etc., like a fully enunciated Y? And the way that I explained that is, remember that every sound has a full range of enunciation. There's like nice, clear, full, slower enunciation for the sound. And then there's, as we speak faster and or more lazily, the sound sort of gets a little less clear, a little faster. It doesn't quite sound so enunciated. I've talked about that many times before. I don't have an official lesson for it yet, but it's going to be worked into the Vowel Master class. And potentially on the other end of that, we have a potentially dropped sound, which you can't just drop any sound, but some sounds can potentially drop. So that would be the logical conclusion on the other end of the spectrum. So the small Y is really just a faster, lazier kind of Y that naturally occurs when we're linking between certain vowels like E or I into other vowels, because the Y sound is already in that area. And so as we release the first vowel, go into the second vowel, we get this sort of lazy, not fully enunciated Y sound because we're not fully trying to go into the sound. It just happens to be there, and it kind of creates this Y-like sound, sort of a lazy Y because it's not fully into the position. So the small Y for linking and the lazy Y, you might say, that's just not fully enunciated, is the same thing. In these words, if I were to try to fully enunciate the Y sound and say cute, human, view, best case, it sounds exaggerated, which could happen in special cases. Worst case, it just sounds unnatural. So if you intentionally really try to push like a nice, good, full, clear Y into these words, you're going to sound weird. So naturally, this would just be a little tiny yeah. Instead of yeah, it's not Q, it's Q. Q. It's just like barely there, very lightly. Cute, human, hue. Not hue, hue. Okay, so just something that might be useful for some people. Okay, Cyper, welcome, Cyper. The good thing about speaking Spanish is that we can easily master Italian native level. It's much easier than Portuguese and their weird pronunciation. Yeah, well, I mean, that's there's probably some level of objectivity to that, but I think that's also a little bit relative. But yeah, no, you're correct. Italian and Spanish. I don't know much Italian. Well, I don't really know any Italian. I don't know much about Italian, I should say. I like very, very lightly sort of like looked at it a little bit a long time ago. And that combined with, listening to some polyglots and stuff go between Spanish and Italian or whatever, it does seem definitely maybe a little more similar than Spanish and Portuguese. Although I think, again, I don't know enough about Italian to really say this, but my impression, because I know a little bit more about Portuguese, my impression, obviously, they're all Romance languages. And so if you go from, like, say, Spanish to Portuguese, Spanish to Italian, Spanish to French, it's going to be relatively easier than say Spanish to English. Even though English has a lot of French influence, our vocabulary is like 60% Latin or French origin in modern English. So we have a lot of shared words, but obviously the grammar is a little bit different. Things, are a bit more different. The biggest problem, I think, for Spanish speakers when going to Portuguese instead of Italian is the sound system. And it's not I wouldn't call it a weird pronunciation. It's just that Portuguese has more sounds than Spanish, especially the vowel sounds. Spanish is very limited in vowel sounds. Portuguese has a lot more because they also have the nasal vowel sounds. And like L's at the end aren't L. So it's not like legal. It's legal, something kind of like that. It's probably a bit more nasal too, but anyway, it's very nasally language where Spanish is not. I don't think Italian is very nasally either. So depending on how you look at it, it can seem like Italian is more similar, and it may be a lot easier for a lot of people. But if you were to go in, figure out the sound system of Portuguese, do some basic ear training, my impression of Portuguese and Spanish is sort of like Russian and Ukrainian, which hope I don't get monetized given current world get demonetized given current world events for mentioning those two. But Russian and Ukrainian are very, very, very similar languages. Like I don't think they're necessarily mutually intelligible completely, but I've talked with a lot of Ukrainians and they say like they can pretty much understand Russian, and like they use Cyrillic just like Russian does. And so there's, a history there. Spanish and Portuguese, spoken Spanish and spoken Portuguese can seem quite different because of the sound system differences. But like I can read Portuguese with relatively few problems. Obviously, there's some words that are used a bit differently or whatever. But if you give me something written in Portuguese that's not something crazy advanced, I'll probably be able to read it and understand what's going on. And I could probably do the same thing with Italian. I've looked a little bit at Italian, written Italian, and to me, Italian seems a little harder to read than Portuguese, because like literally in Portuguese, like you have casa in Spanish and casa in Portuguese, casa, like they're spelled the same. A lot of the words are spelled exactly the same between Spanish and Portuguese. So anyway, yeah, it's an interesting insight. I wonder if there are any Spanish speakers who would disagree with you. Maybe they all agree with you. I don't know, but Anderson, I might have heard. Okay, so we're saying might have heard, right? We need that form of the verb where, and for here it would be a D at the end, heard, because it's have heard. Might be a typo there, but just make sure. I might have heard a couple of times that no would be more British and that neo with the glide Y would be more American. Huh? You mean like for the word no? Like yes, no? Because I can think of an example with N. Maybe you're getting like say the word news. Are you talking about the word no? Kind of confused there. While I wait for your response, I will say about the word news, for example. So notice I'm saying news, new. It's N to U. There's no ya there. New with the glide, and yeah. So that's what I thought. Because I didn't see you talk about the word new anywhere else yet. Yeah. So. Perfect. Okay, good. Because definitely not the word no. Like we don't say nyo, right, or something like that. that'd be weird. So the deal with this, up until maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, if you would have asked me this question, I would have told you that the exact opposite. I would have said that saying news with the Y sound is the British pronunciation, and new or news, depending on which word we're using, but new is the American pronunciation. Then I learned that there are some neutral dialects of American English, because remember, there's more than one neutral accent in American English. Um, I think it's the Western American for sure. I assume it's Western American because this is based on how I speak. Most Western Americans don't add the y, where say maybe some of the other ones like the what is it, the North Midland, and maybe the, well, I don't want to call it Boston. I always want to say Boston. It's not Boston. New England, I guess, area, because those are usually the big two that are talked about in terms of neutral pronunciation. I think sorry about the beeping in the background, somebody's alarm is going off. I think they're the ones that usually add more of the Y sound. So, but I never knew that. Like, I never noticed an American put a Y in those words until a few years ago. So you can use either one. My recommendation, because it doesn't matter which one you do, it really doesn't. That's one of the small details that can maybe. It's not that it doesn't sound neutral if you do or don't do it. It's one of those little details that will kind of stand out to certain listeners. And they'll kind of be like, why is he saying it that way? But if you use news, you're going to have some people from some parts of the country that say, why is he saying it that way? And if you use the other one, so news in the first case, some people it'll stand out to. News, other people it'll stand out to. So either way, it's going to stand out to some groups of people that all generally speak a neutral general American accent. It's just one of those things that kind of stand out. So you're kind of screwed either way, right? There is no true neutral pronunciation of this. Like that, it doesn't exist because we don't have one neutral accent. And at the end of the day, pick the one that you like the best. But my personal recommendation, don't add the Y, because you're just making the pronunciation more difficult. Like, why would you do that if you don't have to? So it's up to you. Welcome, Finn. Hello. I'm sure you have some questions today. Some very advanced, complex, big brain questions that will force me to think a lot. Unless you're just stopping by literally to say hi, in which case that works too. Any other comments? You guys aren't doing a good job today. I already caught up. This is not acceptable. We need more questions. Although I could say a little bit of a quick update. Oh, good. We have some things. A little bit of a quick update on the intonation lesson. So as I posted the other day in a written post, I don't know if everybody saw that, but it's coming along. I've been very busy. I've had some difficulty focusing, but I'm also still trying to like sort through all the data and lay it out and everything. And I'm still trying to connect a couple dots after the discovery I made. And last night I made a pretty big breakthrough because there are 3 types of intonation that I've discovered. And there's a core system underneath the language that will allow you to sort of hack into the intonation of the language. I don't want to give away too many details. I keep it a surprise, but I was able very quickly and easily to notice how that core system fits into one of the types of intonation, because that's actually how I discovered it. And then I was like, okay, well, let me see, does it fit into the other types of intonation? One of the other types, I was like, okay, yeah, it works that way. It's a little bit different, but it's a similar mechanism. So it still works. And then the last type of intonation, I was kind of like, how does it fit in there? And I couldn't quite figure it out. And then last night I figured it out. I was like, oh, that makes perfect sense. I was also trying to figure out why we go up on yes or no questions and down on WH questions. Because, that's probably something that like all or almost all of you know who are watching this. And it's true generally, right? There's ways we can manipulate things, but just in a basic sense, yes, that's generally how it works. But why? Why? It turns out that there's actually a very reasonable, quite logical reason, a reasonable reason, right? It makes sense once you understand the core system and how it works, and what the purpose of a yes or no question is versus what the purpose of a WH question is. It makes perfect sense why we go up on one and down on the other. It's not just, oh, because that's how it is. No, there's a reason underneath the language of why one goes up and the other goes down, and it's blowing my mind. It's magical. So stay tuned for that. I'm still working on that lesson. Hopefully I should be able to get out like a minimal pair extra practice lesson today. So you guys have something, because it's been more than a week since the last lesson, but really trying to get this intonation lesson done. It's going to be a very big one. Would you mind checking a shorts? I could, yeah. You can't give me a link because YouTube won't let you post it, but if you could give me a, like if you put the exact title, I could probably look for it. Cyper, Portuguese is grammatically closer to Spanish than Italian. Okay. So it's easier to understand at the beginning, but at some point along the way, Italian gets so much easier, whereas Portuguese gets harder. Okay. See, I didn't know that. I'm not a native Spanish speaker learning Italian and Portuguese, so I don't have that insight. But yeah, I mean that with the very little that I know, that seems like it can make sense, because I can tell, when you first start, if you already speak Spanish and then you start learning Portuguese, you see a lot of the similarities. You're like, oh, this could be easy. Okay, sure. There's this different word here. There's that different word there. Okay, fine. But I imagine as you get farther and farther along, there starts to get like some more differences. So, yeah. Anyway, Italian has pretty much the same pronunciation. Spanish, the intonation is a bit different, but once you figure out the grammar, you'll sound like a native. Yeah. So, okay, well, there you go. So I know if I want to learn Italian or Portuguese and I want to learn one faster, I'll choose Italian. But I really have very little interest in Italian, and if anything, I'm probably going to learn Portuguese at some point because I love the sound of Portuguese. Oh my God, especially Brazilian Portuguese from the Sao Paulo area. Oh my God. It's like, no offense to Spanish speakers. Spanish is a wonderful, beautiful language. I speak Spanish more or less. I like Spanish. I like Spanish culture. So don't take this the wrong way, but to my ears, Portuguese is kind of like Spanish that sounds so much cooler. It's just like, I love how Portuguese sounds. It's one of the most delightful sounding languages to my ears. Anyway. Okay, so Finn, I notice when I say I don't want to study really lazily, the N sound in wanna sort of disappears and the A before it gets nasalized. Is that bad? Okay, so let's see here. The N in wanna study. Don't want to study. No, that's normal. That's very normal. So it seems to me, Finn, for whatever reason, because you're already obviously quite advanced, you already sound really, really good. I think that a lot of these higher level things that you're asking me questions about, because a lot of the time, right, it's like, yeah, no, that works, right? Especially if we're speaking really fast or really lazily. So this is sort of outside the normal thing. Sometimes the questions you ask, they still fit within the normal. but a lot of them, they're for this sort of really fast or really lazy type speech. Um, and a lot of the times your questions are like, it's like, yeah, that happens, that can work. I think that which I have a theory about this. I haven't been able to test it on many people, but I think you're confirming my theory a bit. I don't know exactly your study methods or whatever, but if like, let's say you noticed in your own speech, right? Like you didn't learn this somewhere, you just started to notice, hey, I'm kind of dropping that N and nasalizing that A a little bit. Like, I wonder if that's just me or if native speakers do that. Um, if that's the case, that would tell me that you are sort of naturally adopting the way natives speak, um, at that sort of faster, lazier speed, based on the base that you already have that is already very solid. And that's a theory that I have, that the better you get with the basics, like the formation of the sounds and how the language flows and the rhythm and everything, when you speed it up, you'll naturally start to kind of start dropping certain things, because that's what natives do. We naturally start dropping things or changing certain things at really fast speed, because it's easier to speak. So if you're experiencing that and you come to me and I'm like, yeah, that works, yeah, that works, yeah, that works, that's a good sign that you're kind of naturally adapting into that faster speed use of the language. Um, and I love that. That's amazing. Um, so yeah, if I say like, I don't want to study. In fact, I can nasalize the O and don't drop the N and the T, like we talked about before. So it seems like, and I've thought about this since you've been asking more and more questions about this sort of nasalization of vowels. I've noticed that at really fast speed, it's actually really common to drop the N and nasalize the vowel before it. We won't necessarily do it all the time. Um, but the more I kind of think about it, the more I kind of try to notice it, the more I'm like, yeah, it can work here, it can work there, it can work there. But as soon as you drop into sort of that normal range, or especially that slower range, that doesn't, it's not an official existing part of the language. We don't have nasal vowels, and so you can't really do it anymore. In the normal range speed, there's some things that can work, like maybe with the don't or the can't. But for like wanna, dropping the N and nasalizing the A, you would never do that in normal speech. Like, it has to be a certain speed, or just a certain really, really lazy type of speech, which does generally tend to go together. Speed and laziness aren't exactly the same thing, but the faster we go, the less we're sort of getting into the full sound. So it creates a lazier version of the sound. They kind of go together as you go up that spectrum. Um, so uh, yeah, you can nasalize the O and don't, nasalize the first A and wanna, drop both ends. I don't want to study. I don't want. So I'm saying like want, it's nasal want, and then I sort of close it. Now I might bring the start bringing the tongue up towards the end, so we get almost like with like, say, like the SKS. It creates the illusion of a K. I do feel like I kind of naturally want to start bringing the tongue up to the end, so it almost starts to create, like, we're already nasal in the ah, and it almost creates sort of illusion like the end's going to be there, and then I drop into the and wanna, but I don't have to actually bring the tongue up. I can just go from nasal ah into by switching from the nasal to the not nasal through the mouth. Wah 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 wah. I don't want to, because I don't want to. I don't want to. That's super native, super native. But it's also super lazy. It's super unclear. It's kind of this faster area, and so we're starting to get some of these details start to get into like mumbling, which is generally looked down upon. It's frowned upon by a lot of people. Um, I mean, in real speech, natives will mumble from time to time. We won't say everything, clearly enough, and we still kind of understand, because you don't have to clearly pronounce everything, right? So there's sort of a balance to it a little bit. If you start saying like, I want to study, I want to study, where like everything is just super unclear and like, what are you saying? That's full mumbling, and that you should avoid. But as long as you're hitting, certain sounds, I don't want to see, that's a little unclear. Study, you can get away with it. It's fine. I don't want to study. I want to study. Fantastic. Yeah. No problem. No problem. Um, Cyber Kevin. I need to like go back through all my live streams where you ask me questions like this and just like cut them out and make like an advanced pronunciation playlist. Like I should do that. I'm probably not going to, but I should. If I could hire an assistant, I would have them do it. But okay. Cyper. Italian has pretty. Oh, I already did that one. Finnegan. I always hear this very extreme reduction of what are you talking about coming out as which doc bout. Since it's a very common sentence, it's not that strange, but it is interesting nonetheless. Would you ever say it like that? It's a pretty extreme reduction. Stockbound. Yeah, I can kind of see what you're saying. It is pretty extreme. That's definitely on the really fast end of things. If I'm not at a certain speed, it's not going to come out quite like that. Like if I were to say it sort of like, quickly, not super fast, like I'm trying to just spit it out. But let's say I'm just, speaking normal, fast, or faster end of normal. I'm within that normal range still. What you talking about? Which so there's still like a little there, which instead of which sh, I'm actually doing like sort of like a CHSH combination sort of, which and then talk. So it's still a T, which you're talking about, can kind of maybe be made a little bit soft, to sound a little bit kind of like a D, but I would still say it's a T, which talking about. So I would say talk. So we have sort of a syllabic end there, and then into bout. So there's no and about. Now at any time, of course, like the and about could come. The I between talk and the end sound, like talk in instead of talking. At any time, those details could pop up or disappear. Remember, it's a dynamic range. I could say it 10 times, and maybe 3 or 4 of those times the and about happens to be pronounced. So I wouldn't reduce it quite this extremely if I'm not speaking really, really fast. But that can exist, yes. I would not use that as like the way to pronounce it. I would say if you're speaking really quick and it comes out that way, that's fine. I would want to hear maybe just like a couple more sounds in there, and within the normal range of speech. So, okay. The shorts is when a U.S. American nails every geography question. That should be an interesting video because I can't imagine an American doing that. Unfortunately, when you live in the empire, you kind of fail at that sort of stuff. The person pronounced of as "uff" instead of. That's not the first time I heard. You could use heard here, but I have heard. Would probably be a bit better. Maybe he's saying off. The sentence was name the capital of Canada. I couldn't quite get it. Capital of Canada. What is capital of Canada? Montreal? I have no idea. I'm just trying to think of Canadian cities. I was going to say Quebec, but I think Quebec is... Wait, is Quebec a city or is that a province? See, I'm American. I don't know. I do not know. Okay. Which is a shame because that really kind of just makes me look like not intelligent. I just like, we don't tend to care about geography very much. Now, if you ask me about Japan, I'll probably know a little bit more. I mean, there's like Hokkaido, the North Island, and there's Kyushu and all this stuff. My knowledge on that is a little rusty, but anyway, that's not the point. Okay, so I see. So it's from Lingualizer. I see 3 shorts. Same title. No. Okay, so one says gets a geography question right. Gets a geography question right. When U.S. Americans, when a U.S. American. Okay, so 2 slightly different titles. This is when a U.S. American nails. Okay. Is there a non-U.S. American? Because that just seems redundant. Okay, so it'd be this one. Okay. So I can tell you just from listening to this guy, um, and I'm going to his channel really quick to hear him speak a little bit more. Yeah. So I can tell you, it was a little, I had to kind of focus a bit when he was asking that girl questions. I could already kind of hear it. And then I clicked on his channel, and he has like a little intro video or whatever on his thing. And listening to him more directly just speak, I can tell you he's not a native speaker. So, or if he is a native speaker, I would say that he's probably not a native born US speaker. Like maybe he grew up here at an early age or something, but he has like influence, like accent influence from his parents, because that can happen, or whatever it is. But he doesn't sound. He sounds like he's not an American-born native speaker that has been um, speaking the whole time. Okay, so hold on. Capital of Canada. Okay, it's the one. There's a girl in the thumbnail with black hair. Okay, so well, that was a different title, sir. Okay. I see one with a girl with red hair. I would describe her as having red hair, but there's a girl in the thumbnail. I'll click this one instead. Yeah, she's definitely American. Okay, it just says name 3 countries to start with S. There's nothing about the capital of Canada. I'm kind of confused. Anyway, regardless, this unless you're talking about the person he's interviewing or talking to, like if you're talking about the guy himself who like has the channel, he's not a native speaker. So him saying, if he's the one saying things like instead of, that's a very common non-native pronunciation mistake. So now this guy does sound very, very good, but I could definitely tell he has an accent. It's very clear that he has an accent. I'm not exactly sure where he's from. I'd maybe say somewhere in Europe, maybe Eastern Europe, but I can't quite tell. Like, I'm not picking up any particular language. Okay, so anyway, moving on. One thing I will say really quick, because you said like it's not the first time you've heard someone say, of is of. You have to keep in mind 2 details. Number one, well, 3 details. Number one would actually be, yes, there's of and off, which if you don't hear the vowel correctly, you might misinterpret it. That's also another common non-native issue. But provided it's not the word off, if they're actually saying uff, right, with an and an F sound, there's 2 things you have to keep in mind. Number one is that we have this partial end of word devoicing thing that can happen. And so it's not that we're saying uff, but sometimes it's possible that maybe it can come out where like we start the V and then we drop into that voiceless F, and you hear that F coming through, not so much the V, because the vowel is already voiced and it sort of hides the voice of that little short V that we start with. And again, that's why I call it partial end of word devoicing, not end of word devoicing, because otherwise it just would sound weird if you completely devoiced that vowel sound at the end. So we wouldn't say uff, but you might hear something like, if I slow it down, something like say I'm in the, and then immediately I just drop the voice. But I don't go right. It's so it could be really hard to hear that and pick that up. That's a common issue. That's one thing that might be happening when you hear uff. It's actually just partial end of word devoicing. What was the other thing I was going to think of? Oh, yeah. There are... I don't think this really happens with of. The most common thing that happens with of is we'll drop the V, right? It was like kind of, or the color of the sky, the color the sky. So it's very common to just drop that V sound altogether, and it's not even a V or an F, it's just a. But there are some other cases like have, right, where like there's certain combinations like have to, where what should be a V, right, have is a V sound. But in the combination have to, it almost always comes out as an F, and that's because due to the voicelessness of the T, in two, and usually it goes this way, but this is sort of a backwards effect. It's a special case because they so commonly go together. You could also say habda with like a V and a D there, but it's for some reason it's very, very common to actually just change the V into an F and have to. So there are weird things that happen like that as well. I don't think there's anything that happens with of like that. Maybe there is, but yeah, that's another thing to keep in mind if you experience something similar. Sometimes there's just really high frequency combinations that act different. They're exceptions to what usually happens. Okay. So, no, yeah, that's pretty interesting. Everything I notice in my own speech was never consciously picked up by me. I just find it interesting to pay attention to what I do because I think it's interesting and plus random plus sign. And I wonder if it stands out as a me thing or if natives do it too. Yeah, I wouldn't doubt if there's some things that you do that natives don't, but based on a lot of your questions, as I said, it seems you're sort of naturally just doing what natives would do because you already have a solid base. So I'm not giving you free license and blessing to say, hey, just do whatever comes out. Like, not necessarily, but it does seem you're on the right track, and you could probably feel pretty confident that a lot of things that you're noticing in your own speech are perfectly valid. Just remember, a lot of these things apply to that really fast area. Okay, not necessarily the normal area. So that's where you got to kind of pay attention. Which, I mean, you should more or less naturally do things. But if like I tell you, oh yeah, this, don't wanna, like, yeah, this exists, and then you start letting it sort of slip down into a little bit slower, then it kind of just sounds like you're mumbling. It just sounds weird. So don't let it cross the wrong line. That would be my only warning there. But anyway, okay, I saw your video about voice place. So Perchico. I'm gonna say Perchico. It's a very American way of saying that. So it's probably not the right way to say it, but Perchico. Yes, welcome. I saw your video about voice placement, saying that it was useless, but I don't understand how some people who are bilingual in Spanish and English natively, their voices change and they have like that American placement, Spanish placement. A very good example of this is the actor Viggo Mortensen. Yeah, so I actually have a very easy way to explain what's going on there. It's mouth posture. It's not placement. Now, so obviously people have different opinions, okay? Even say within the field of linguistics, there are people who, like disagree on certain details about things. So obviously, probably the biggest channel on YouTube, Rachel's English, she talks about voice placement and this and that, whatever. And it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think I know what she's trying to do with it. This whole like speaking from the chest, lowering your voice, blah, blah, blah. But to me, it's just, it's sort of like a half hack that's trying to get you to do certain things with your vocal tract without you actually consciously being able to control your vocal tract. Which then causes other problems with like the formation of certain sounds. So like maybe, yeah, you sound a little clearer. Maybe you sound, like your voice is placed right or whatever. And maybe some sounds are a little easier, but then if you don't actually have the control over the vocal tract itself, you just sort of shifted things a little bit, you're going to have other problems. So, let's see, I mean, the voice sounds the same, but he still sounds American, and in Spanish, he sounds completely Argentinian. Okay. So what happens with Okay. All languages and dialects, because it could be different from dialect to dialect, like American English versus British English, right? So British English seems to have definitely it's more closed. They're spoken from farther forward in the mouth, probably have a slightly pushed forward tongue posture. And so things are a little tighter and they're sort of shifted forward a little bit. And you can even hear this if you listen very, very, very carefully. You can hear this in the quality of the schwa. The British schwa and the American schwa are not the same. Just like the Russian schwa and the American schwa, even the Russian schwa and the Russian schwa and the British schwa are not the same. The Russian and the British schwa are closer to each other, it seems. But if I wouldn't be surprised. I haven't tested this because I don't really know any British people. But if I were to go to Britain, and let's say that I tried to speak in a British accent, which, yeah, I don't have the best British accent. I think it sounds decent, but I can almost guarantee you that any Brit that hears me speak, if I were to say, let's say water, okay, water, to an American, that probably sounds more British. They'd be like, man, it sounds British to me. To a non-native English speaker, they'd be like, yeah, that sounds British. But if I go to a British person, they'll probably be like, there's something wrong there. And a big part of it is that I'm doing the schwa from it's more open, it's more lower, it's more centered, where the British schwa is a little bit more closed, maybe a little bit more slanted relatively compared to American English. So it's a bit tighter. It's more like what to. And again, I don't speak British English, so I haven't tried to master that or anything. But it sounds slightly different. The quality is different. Okay. Anyway, that's not the point. Point is that different languages, different dialects, depending on the mouth posture. Okay. So you have your throat, you have your tongue. The back of the tongue and the throat connect together. Okay. When people tell you to speak from the chest, my understanding of what they're trying to get you to do based on what I know about how the vocal tract works, what they're trying to get you to do is open up more, right? Because many languages compared to American English, and I'm seeing this more and more as I work with different people in mouth posture. I'm seeing the same issues, but we're actually going in and getting control over the vocal tract and adjusting it step by step instead of just trying to speak deeper. What they're trying to do when they talk about voice placement is they're trying to get you to open up, get more breath, set that jaw a little bit more open, right? They tell you to relax into the schwa, but whatever's relaxed for you is going to be based on your native language. So that's going to be more closed, more pushed forward. So this relax into the schwa is an American English bias that teachers don't realize they have. Because to me, yeah, I say it's very relaxed, it's very open, but you go to a British person, to them, the schwa is probably going to be very relaxed as well, but it's not going to be as open as American English. So that's kind of what they're trying to get you to do. They're trying to get you to open up and sort of shift things into a more open position. And that does make you sound clearer, right? When we get a little bit more breath, when we get the throat a little bit more open, especially up around this area, I've noticed a lot of people have this sort of back interference where it's kind of a little bit tight in here, and you kind of got to open that up and relax it a bit. You get the jaw a little bit more open. Okay. Working with people on mouth posture, I've noticed, right? As soon as they add a little bit more breath, they start sounding clearer. Okay. Just that one little detail, bam, they start sounding clear. Once they start to kind of get that throat a little less tense, a little more relaxed, they start sounding clearer. Okay. Once they, and this is independent. Like let's say they do just the breath, or let's say they've done just the throat. You know, as I've gone through this, I've tackled different angles with different people. It always gets the same result. When I have them just open that jaw a little bit more and talk from there, even if the sounds aren't right, they sound clearer. Okay. So the function in American English, the function of having that jaw a bit more open, having the throat a bit more relaxed and a bit more open, and having a bit more breath, the purpose of all three of those is because American English demands a certain level of openness to sound clear and natural. Okay. If you are not open enough, you won't sound clear and natural. It's not going to work in the language. You go to British English and you're a little more closed. It's perfectly fine because British English is a little more closed, a little tighter compared to American English. but I've worked with enough people speaking different languages to see these results over and over and over and over and over again. And what happens, many languages, even British English, as I said, seems to have the tongue pushed slightly forward. Now, what happens when you have the tongue slightly pushed forward back here, because the back of the tongue and the throat are connected, it's going to pull things up a little bit. That also tends to get a little bit of extra tightness here, which is a separate problem that we usually have to work on. But having the tongue pushed forward, it's a very slight little thing. It's not like you're doing like that. It's a very slight little thing, but it pushes things up here. It may or may not shift your voice. That's something else that I've learned recently. It may or may not actually shift your voice. It will tend to sort of pull up your vocal tract to make you sound a little bit higher. And so when they take you to speak from the chest, they're kind of trying to, what they're indirectly trying to get you to do is sort of lower this down. Now, you also don't want to push it. You want to relax it. Okay, that's part of the trick. But by directing you to speak from your chest or whatever, you can accidentally or subconsciously end up doing that. But you don't even realize that. You just think, oh yeah, the speaker in the chest helps, which I've had a lot of people come up to me and they're just like, either it doesn't work because they've tried it and it doesn't work, and they know what they're doing because they know a lot about pronunciation, or B, they come to me asking how to do that because no matter what they do, they can't get it to work. So it seems to work for some people where that concept of speaking from the chest just happens, luckily for that person, happens to sort of start getting some of the base posture that we need. But like, I'm not speaking from my chest right now. I'm speaking American English and speaking normally. I'm not speaking from my chest. Most of the vibrations I feel are coming from here, right in the middle of my throat. Okay, I can put my hand here. Yeah, okay, I feel vibrations. I can put my hand, la 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 la. Put my hand here, maybe. I can kind of feel it through my jaw a little bit. But if I were to feel hello, hello, talking, la 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 la, yeah, it's maybe like at least 50, 60, no, more than 50, at least 60 to 70% of the vibrations I'm feeling, at least bare minimum, coming from right here. And I'm an average American speaker. Okay. So that's why it doesn't make any sense to me when they say speak from the chest. But because of what I know about mouth posture and how the vocal tract works, it makes sense to me what they're trying to get you to do. And maybe they don't realize that that's what they're trying to get you to do. Maybe they've just tried it and they're like, hey, this seems to help this person, so I'm going to tell other people about it. But really, you have to go in and get control over your vocal tract itself. And then from there, you can build the right mouth posture. I was alluded a bit to this back pressure. I like to call it the back interference. And it can come out in different ways. It can come out a little bit more like this. It can come out a little bit more like this. It can come out a little bit more like this, where you can actually get an artificial deepness. So when you start relaxing here, something in here can kind of get out of place and you end up sort of sounding like this a bit. There's all kinds of weird little things that can happen as you're trying to adjust this forward posture into more of an open American posture. And it seems to vary from individual to individual, but many people have this sort of back interference where there's this little extra tightness that stays there, even though they get that tongue out of the way. And it's usually something separate that we have to work on. So it still makes sense to me that even if, like, let's say if you're pushed forward and it kind of pulls your voice up a little bit naturally, when you shift it down, maybe your voice doesn't really change because you still have this extra little tension or something going on. Let me try to get specifically to what you're saying here. Okay, so because I know I'm kind of like laying out a bunch of things and talking about posture here. So how some people who are bilingual in Spanish and English natively, their voices change and they have, okay, so their voices change and they have like that American placement and Spanish placement. So it'd be American posture and Spanish posture, not placement. I can already tell you, I haven't mastered the Spanish posture yet, but I've played a lot with it, especially in singing. And I've even talked to my Spanish partner that I worked with for quite a while when I was teaching myself Spanish. We're still in touch. We're still friends and everything. And about a month ago or so, I wanted to test some things with her and see, okay, if I do this, if I do that, blah blah blah, and without trying to shift my voice placement, without trying to like raise my placement out of my chest or anything like that, because it's not in my chest to begin with. That wouldn't make sense. But just doing the things that I know about posture and how Spanish seems to be kind of pushed forward a little bit. It's mostly spoken from up here, where American English is spoken more from the middle, and just like tweaking certain little things. She pretty much confirmed to me that because the way I speak Spanish now, she said, "You don't sound like a native, but I wouldn't know where you're from," which is great, especially for somebody who taught themselves Spanish and had no idea what they were doing when they were doing it. Um, and especially for somebody who doesn't really speak Spanish much anymore and is very very rusty. Um, but when I made certain little changes and I started saying, okay, what if I do this? What if I do that? She was saying, yeah, that sounds native. Like that sounds a lot better. So I got a more native, I managed to create a more native sounding Spanish through shifting certain details of my vocal tract without any thought of shifting my voice placement at all. This whole idea of voice placement, it just, anyway, you know my opinion on it. Also, Delio, yes, I see you here. I don't want to skip by you here. First name's pronounced Delio. 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 Oh, okay. I keep saying Delio. Sorry. Okay, fine. So Delio. 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 Yeah, that makes sense if you're a Spanish or Portuguese speaker. Yeah, but I'm reading it in an English way, right? This is English. But no, yeah, that's fine. I'll try to remember that. Okay, so back to Portugal. Okay. It still sounds American, and in Spanish, he sounds completely Argentinian, or at least half of it. What about when Chicanos speak English? And I see you there, Abdullah. Oh, yeah, okay. I don't want that. So, hello, Abdullah. Trying to handle this thread here to tie this up. Dude speaking from the chest, blah, 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 is bull. I'll make you sound deeper. That definitely, yeah. So if I try to speak, so I'm trying not to lower my voice, like lower my pitch. I'm just trying to shift into my chest. So I've practiced this a lot with singing in English and like speaking with like a chest voice instead of like a head voice, which I'm not an expert on, but I know that concept exists. And it seems if I try to sing from my chest, I do sound a lot better in singing, but in speaking, I don't speak from the chest. So I'm trying not to just lower my tone here. So if I'm talking, it naturally kind of pushes out. It's which maybe I just don't have full control over my diaphragm here because I'm not an expert on acting or singing. But if I try to speak more from here, I naturally kind of want to like use more volume. I want to push out more breath, kind of, and it's sort of like a natural projection. And you don't necessarily just lower your voice. You probably will maybe sound a little deeper or a little more resonant, like have a sort of like a fuller sounding voice in a way. Just like on the opposite end, if you speak very nasally, it kind of makes your voice sound kind of thin in a way. So there is that sort of effect. So what Abdullah is saying is, I wouldn't completely agree that it just makes your voice sound deeper. But it doesn't make you sound more natural in American English. The only way that it makes you sound more natural or maybe can give you a better effect is because by trying to do that, certain things in here shift into a more American posture. So it's not the cause, it's actually a secondary, like it's causing other things to happen that you don't realize are happening. And you might think that you can feel these things, but based on just like trying to move your throat in 4 directions, trying to move the back of the tongue by itself in 4 directions, especially the throat. There are so many people that when I start working with them, they can't feel what's going on. They can't feel it. Or maybe they do feel it and they're like, yeah, I mean, like I'm pushing it out, but they don't create a difference in sound. So they feel like they're doing this, right? Like imagine if it were the finger. They feel like they're doing this, but based on the sound they're making, there's no change. So what's really happening is it's like they can move, like this, and they feel that, but they don't realize that there's this whole range of motion here. And part of getting control of your vocal tract is developing that range of motion. So Unless you go through the proper training, you might assume that you have a certain control over your vocal tract that you don't. I can almost guarantee, like even me, who has apparently, seemingly, I seem to have some natural talent for pronunciation and languages. Um, so I naturally kind of play with sounds and stuff. I like doing that, and so that has helped me a lot. But it's not just like, oh, I can magically feel everything. Like there's still some little things in my throat and stuff that I don't really feel very well. So the average person, there's going to be certain things that they don't feel, because, and you can learn to feel them, of course, but you don't need to feel them, right? Like when you're speaking your language, usually you don't need to feel anything going on there, and so your brain just doesn't pay any attention to it. Anyway, okay, so what about when Chicanos speak English? The way they pronounce words and rhythm sounds completely American, but you can tell they're Mexican because of their voice. No, it has nothing to do with their voice. I mean, maybe it can have a little bit to do with their voice, but so I don't have like a pinpoint expert explanation of this. But what I do know is that, so like Chicano English, okay, and I think the average American would probably agree with me. And there's nothing wrong with Chicano English; it's perfectly fine, perfectly valid. All dialects, all whatever are valid. African American vernacular is valid as well. But listening, if you take sort of like an average American speaker who doesn't speak Chicano English, or maybe if you talk to a Chicano speaker themselves, maybe they'll say the same thing. I don't know, but if you say, okay, what does Chicano English sound like to you? Does it sound American or does it sound like something else? And they'll probably tell you, like, it sounds American with a Spanish coloring. Sounds American with a Spanish coloring. And for some speakers, that coloring might be a little bit stronger. For other speakers, it might be a little bit less. There's also many like second or second and possibly third generation Asian speakers who have a similar type of thing. I don't know if there's a particular label for it. And the exact effect might, it'll vary a little bit if it's like Chinese heritage, Japanese heritage, whatever. But there's quite a few Asian speakers that if you listen to them, it's like, yeah, they sound native. They like, especially if they're born and grew up here, it's like, yeah, they're native speakers. But if you really listen to them closely, you're like, well, there's a little something here and there that gives this slight Asian feel, this slight Asian coloring to it. Just based on the way that they're either holding their vocal tract or the way that they're producing certain sounds in a very subtly different way. And again, it's perfectly valid. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's there. And so the way that I would explain that, there's a couple ways that I could explain that. I don't think that they're necessarily holding the vocal tract differently. Maybe that could partially be like it's being held very subtly differently, almost sort of like it's maybe like a 80 to 90% American posture with like a hybrid 10 to 20% Spanish posture in the case of Chicano. I don't know. And or maybe the posture is completely American, but some of the sounds that they tend to use are affected by Spanish. So it's a difficult thing to say. I am not like a full-blown linguist, I have a lot of my own theories, a lot of my own ideas. I've done a lot of research in the field of linguistics and language teaching and all this stuff. I do have some actual university knowledge from some classes that I've taken and whatnot. So I'm not just some random guy on the internet. But when it comes to the exact mechanics of why that's happening, I can guarantee you it's not voice placement. But the exact mechanism, I see that there's several possible explanations. It could even be more than one at the same time. And I don't have a solid, concrete answer to be like, oh, this is exactly why. But I can guarantee you it's not voice placement. It's not because they're like speaking lower or higher or something. It's like if it's not like they're trying to speak English, but with like a higher voice placement, and part of the reason why I can guarantee you that is because, so The only time that voice placement makes much sense to me is maybe if we're talking about speaking from the nose. Even then, I wouldn't call it voice placement, but the term makes a little more sense in that context to me, because it almost kind of sounds like you're actually moving your voice up into here. That's not actually what's happening necessarily, but you get this much more nasally sound. There are American speakers, native speakers, who sound, right, all their sounds are perfectly American, their posture is perfectly American, except their nasal flap is more open than the average American. And so they end up kind of sounding really nasally, right? Like, hey guys, how's it going? Right? Or if you know anything about the 90s, did I do that? Right? Steve Urkel, Family Matters, classic. Anyway, or Fran Drescher, of course, the nanny. Now, Fran Drescher does have a little bit of like, she has this New Yorker type accent going on. And so she doesn't sound, her pronunciation doesn't sound necessarily completely neutral, but she sounds very nasally as well. There are some speakers who, for whatever reason, they naturally speak more nasally. And to most of us, that sounds annoying. Objectively, I'm not going to say there's anything wrong with it, but to the average American's ears, if your voice sounds too nasally, it's going to sound annoying because most Americans don't speak that way. However, all the sounds might be the same. Okay. Everything else might be the same. It's just you sound too nasally. And yet, right, it's not like it's giving them an accent. They just sound too nasally. So this idea of like shifting your voice, as I said, even if I speak from my chest, like it's not going to change because I'm not speaking from the chest for one, but if I do speak from the chest or I speak from the throat or I speak from the nose, that doesn't actually change my accent. Okay. It has nothing to do with my accent. So anyway, hopefully you get the point. I could rant and ramble on about that forever. But I can guarantee you it's not voice placement that's causing those differences. It's mouth posture is most likely. Either mouth posture or in the cases like Chicano English, as I said, it could be a coloring of some sounds from the other language. Okay. Delio. Wait, no, hold on. Okay, so you put YOO. I'm going to interpret that as you, which also tells me that you're a Portuguese speaker. Delio. Anyway, okay, so Delio. Yes, totally. Opening up the throat and using more breath makes a huge difference. Yes, you sound even better when you couple that with the correct tongue and jaw position. Thank you. Exactly. Abdullah says, And I'm sure there's a follow-up there. But Wendell has entered the chat. Sorry, Wendell, it took me a second. I was ranting about mouth posture. But I now see you here, and I'm going step by step. So, yes, weekly questions from Wendell. But first, from Nosredna, with a very horrible impersonation of a Russian accent. Sounds apparently are fine, but their voice is something else. Forgot the word. Shows maybe that they're not native. Yeah, you can say shows. So their voice or something else shows that they're not natives. Is that the mouth posture? My explanation of it would be yes, that's the mouth posture. Now that being said, again, I do want to emphasize that I've gotten some people to a point where they have the basic posture, like they've sort of more or less tamed that back of the tongue. They can do a really good schwa consistently, right? Their throat is generally more open, more clear. Their breath is flowing nice. Everything sounds really, really good. But there's this, again, this area in here. And I'm going to be making, at some point, I'm going to be making a little bit of like a follow-up sort of additional supplementary lesson to the phase 0, because there's certain little things that I've learned that are going to be very useful for some of you. But many, almost everybody that I worked with, actually, some people more than others. If you imagine there's like the top of your throat, and we're focused on the inside here, so inside the tube here. If you go from like the top of the throat, like right under your jaw here, and you go diagonally up towards that nasal flap, in that area in there, it seems that going from a language that has that tongue pushed farther forward, which pretty much I think everybody I've worked with has that. American English seems to be the weird one, because even British English seems to have that sort of more closed, push forward posture. But even if they sort of, okay, shift down, they relax, they get this more open, they get everything in place. Again, some people more than others, there's that area back there where I can still hear. My ears are getting really good at hearing this from people now. Like my ears are on steroids after going through this mouth posture process with people, because like I can hear so many subtle little details of like, oh, your throat's a little too closed, or oh this, or oh that, that normally you probably wouldn't even notice. But anyway, I'm able to hear. There's, so like for example, one person I started working with on it, they had this what I call artificial deepness. So like they were shifting everything just right, but they kind of had this little bit of a deep sound. See, so like everything that I'm doing is normal. I'm speaking the way that I normally do, except I'm shifting just a little tiny detail with some of the muscles in my throat. I'm not even trying to shift my voice down necessarily. It's just there's sort of a little extra openness in the throat, because see, forward. It sounds a little deeper. That's downward. It sounds even deeper than that. So when you get more space in your throat, it naturally creates a bit of a deeper sound. And so if you kind of push too open, even if it's not like something extreme, but there's just something with these muscles that are kind of a little too open there, you get this artificial deepness. Okay. So there's all kinds of subtle little things that you can do to affect the deepness of your voice, or to get extra restriction, or you're kind of a little too tight up through here. And I've worked with a lot of people so far. It seems that even if you get all the other details in check, there's still this core area here that there's a lot of little subtleties that even if you have the general posture, you might still have something that's a little bit off in here. It's sort of like an additional little thing that you have to also work out on top of the posture itself. And that depends a bit on the native language. That depends a bit on the individual. I had a student a while ago who is a Spanish speaker. He's a native Spanish speaker. That I wasn't even working with him on posture, because last time I saw him, I don't think I even had the concept of posture yet. But in both Spanish and English, when he talks like this. Now I can immediately start creating this type of effect just by manipulating certain details in my upper throat. We get this sort of tighter, more closed off sound. You can reverse that. You can open that up. You can undo that, right? So notice how, right, when we're talking about posture, yeah, okay, there's a subtle direct effect on the voice itself, right? Because like if you push forward, you kind of pull things up a bit. If you relax down, it'll settle down a bit. There's not going to be a whole lot of range and voice change there. It's going to be very, very small. But there's other little details, whether you're, lowering your tone down, you're raising your tone up, right? That's more pitch changes. Or if you have this a little extra tightness in here, which could maybe be choking you slightly in this direction, or maybe it's choking you slightly in this direction, or maybe you're just a little too open going outward this direction too much, or maybe you just have this little extra tightness into here, right on the inside. Now I kind of feel like I sound like a 90s wrestler, like, oh, like what was that, Randy Savage, I think, Macho Man. Grrr! What, I don't know. But there's little things that you can do to manipulate your voice that have nothing to do with the posture itself. And it definitely has nothing to do with placement. Okay. I think that the placement, I really don't want to say this because I do have a lot of respect for Rachel, and I know she has a singing background, and I know that is partially informing her experience and stuff here. But I'll say that the people that hear her talk about voice placement and then they come to certain conclusions about like how the voice works, I think it's a very shallow understanding of how the voice works. Not that she has a shallow understanding, but maybe the people that see her content and then make certain conclusions based off of that content. They just don't have the full picture of like how to manipulate the voice and how that works. And that's not, I'm not saying that's bad. I'm not saying, oh, you're stupid or anything. I'm just saying like there's more to it than that. And you have to sort of go in and play with your voice and experiment how to do these things in order to get better control over it. Instead of just trying to shift your voice like to a lower position. It's, yeah. Anyway, that's my perspective. Okay, Wendell. In Name of Cars, okay, Name of Cars, interesting. The sound V is dropped in fast speech. Is it the same in the sound V? Okay, so is it the same with the V sound in love in this expression, I love you? Okay. So the first thing, Wendell and everybody, you have to understand is the V in of is commonly dropped in that particular word. There's various reasons for that. It's a very common function word. So it usually tends to be unstressed. It tends to be reduced even. And that's actually the reduction is dropping the V sound. Because if we drop the there's kind of nothing left but the V. And there's some interesting things that can happen. But generally, we don't always drop the V, especially if we can link to a vowel with it. But if you have like a V to a K, like we do here of cars, it's going to be very, very natural. It's like, okay, why would we make it harder by saying when we could just drop the V and say cars? Okay. So very common, very normal. But that's special to the word of itself. And that doesn't even have to be in fast speech. That's a normal speech. Okay. It's just a normal thing. I don't want to say the only time, but keeping the V more often than not would be in like really slow speech or clearly enunciated speech where you're almost always going to keep it because you're trying to push everything out really clearly. But in the flow of normal speech, we still very commonly drop the V in of. Okay. Question about love. So love you. Love view. It's going to sound exactly like the word view. If I try to drop the V, love you. Now, best case, it sounds like you're mumbling. Maybe from the context, I can understand what you're saying, but you're not saying the word. You're really not. So no, you cannot. You can't do that. Now, let's say if we're speaking really quickly, I love you. Maybe then in really fast speech, maybe, yeah, it that doesn't sound too bad. But you have to be speaking really quickly, like the whole thing, not just like that particular word or whatever. So that would only be in fast speech. And even then, it's not necessarily something that you have to do. Okay, Abdullah, how to know whether my tongue is pushed forward or not? Good question. So this whole process of mouth posture is a catch-22. And I never actually looked up, I'm pretty sure I'm using that term right. But catch-22 is basically, so let's say you're 18, you've never had a job. Okay. So you go and you try to get a job because you need to work, right? And all the companies that you apply to, they want you to have experience so they don't have to train you, right? Well, you don't have experience because you've never had a job, but you need experience in order to get the job. Okay. That's sort of the catch-22, right? So it's like you can't get the job because you don't have the experience, but you can't get the experience because nobody will give you a job, right? So it's this cycle that like, okay, how does that work? If your posture has the tongue slightly pushed forward, as I said, it's a very little shift. Now it creates a really big difference. But in my mouth, when I shift it forward or relax it back into my normal posture, it's a very tiny little subtle shift in tension in the back here. It's not like you're pushing your tongue like that. You're not talking like this, in another language. But that also shifts everything here. So like even the schwa itself, not only will it be more closed, but it'll actually sound sort of like it's slanted, shifted forward if your language has a schwa in the middle of the mouth like that. Because the American one is more open and down, has more space. So aside from being more open, right, because the closedness is also a big part of the difference. But if your posture is pushed farther forward, that's going to feel relaxed to you. You're not going to feel any tension there. For me, because my posture doesn't have the tongue pushed forward, um, I can actually create a subtle little tension pushing forward that isn't normally there. And it's relatively easy for me to sort of find that. And then I can just settle back down. But my normal posture, I don't really feel what my tongue is doing, at least not as well as trying to push it forward. So for you, how do you know if it's pushed forward or not? At the beginning, you can't. um, Now, let's say, for example, if you speak a particular language, like, okay, Russian. I know Russian has the tongue pushed forward. You say, hey, does Russian? I'm a Russian speaker. Does Russian have a posture with a push forward tongue? Yes, I have that information. I can give you that. It does. Okay, now you know, even if you don't feel it, so you know that you have to kind of try to start feeling it and relax it down and back. Um, but if you speak another language like that I don't know the posture for, like maybe Arabic, I assume maybe you speak Arabic, or I don't know, Afrikaans or something, some other language that I have no idea about the posture. I don't have that information to give you. So um, eventually I'll have sort of a database. I'll like sort of know like, okay, these languages have push forward tongue posture. But what I can say is that odds are very, very, very good based on my current experience that you do have a push forward tongue. Um, and I say that because I've worked with Russians, Ukrainians, and a German speaker, an Austrian German, but still a German speaker. Um, I'm currently working also with a Mandarin speaker, a Cantonese speaker. Um, what else? I'm working with a French speaker. Um, and then, of course, I have my experience with Spanish. And I can tell you, and then, as I said, like with British English, well, received pronunciation, proper British English, um, like all these other languages, they all tend to have the mouth more closed. They all tend to have a slightly push forward tongue posture. They all tend to be maybe not necessarily spoken from up here, like British English and Spanish tend to be spoken maybe more from up here. Some of them might still be centered. Like it seems, I can't guarantee this, but based on my work with Russian speakers, it does seem that Russian is also spoken more or less maybe from here. It could be maybe from here, but more from here. It's just more closed. It's a little hard to tell the exact details. I haven't gone down and pinpointed all that because it's not the biggest point. It doesn't necessarily matter, but that's the center of gravity, right? Because you push forward, but the center of gravity might be here, or could even be back here. Scottish English seems to be more open, but the center of gravity is more back here. So you can have, there's the openness, which American English seems to be, compared to many other languages, all the other languages that I've worked with, except for German. German is also quite open. American English is quite open. Many languages seem to be quite closed. That's the openness, okay, the general openness of the mouth. The tongue pushed forward or not, with the Austrian German speaker, his tongue was pushed forward. So his mouth was a little bit more open, but his tongue was pushed forward. Okay, so that's two different combinations. The push forward and the more closed seem to go together, but I can't tell you that because I don't know based on your language. I don't have an experience. So there's the openness, there's the push forward or not push forward, so the forward or back. Those are two different parts of the posture. Okay, and then there's another thing I was going to say there, but yeah, the way that the throat might be a little extra tense and tight as well. So that might need to be a little more open or potentially a little more closed. I don't know, depending. Usually it seems to be a little bit too tight. And then of course there's the breath control, usually pushing out a little bit more breath. Most other languages seem to use just a tiny bit less breath flow. So American English will be open, not push forward, generally a little bit more relaxed open throat, and a little bit more breath flow. So since I don't have an answer for you, I say most likely your tongue is probably pushed forward based on my experience. But if you go through the phase 0 work, and you really try to master like the 4 directions of the throat, the 4 directions of the back of the tongue, and trust me, doing the throat will also help you a lot because you have to separate out the throat from the tongue. That really helps you feel what's going on. There's a reason for everything. Okay. And then you practice trying to perfect that dead sound, because the purpose of the dead sound is to break you out of your posture and get rid of that push forwardness. So you might work for quite a while on things and still not notice any difference back here. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're not pushed forward. It can be a really tricky thing. My ears are good enough that if you do a dead sound or a schwa and everything else is good except your tongue is pushed slightly forward, I will hear that your tongue is pushed slightly forward. My ears have developed that ability working with people. It's kind of magic to a lot of people because they try to do, the dead sound or a schwa or whatever, and I'm like, no, you have a little too much tension on the back, or your tongue is pushed a little too far forward, and they're like, how do you hear that? Like, it's there, trust me. And then they try to adjust and it goes away, if they have the ability to adjust it at that point. So you got to work on it. For YouTube members, like membership channel members and Patreon members, I do, not for the lowest level tier, but I think for like the mid and upper level tiers, I do offer the ability for you to send me audio recordings that I can give you feedback on. If this is just a one-time thing, if you want to send a quick, which I can't do this for everybody, but if you want to send me like a recording of you trying to say the dead sound, or it's just like, okay, I can't guarantee, but most likely I'll be able to hear if you're pushed forward or not. I'll at least be able to tell if your tongue is dead or not. And then you can maybe go based off that feedback and try to work on things. But other than that, you just got to play with it. Okay, Wendell, do you know, that's already one. Do you know a fruit in Spanish called sapote? It's a tropical fruit, an English translation for it. I do not know the names of a bunch of different fruit. I don't think I've heard of that before in Spanish. So if there either is a translation for English or it's a tropical fruit that we're not familiar with. Because we would have either taken that name and call it like zapote. That's how we would pronounce it, zapote. Or we already have a name for it, right? So we either don't know about it, we have a different name for it. One of those two, because otherwise we would use the Spanish term if it were the same. Anyway, how do you pronounce for in this question sentence? Any English translation for it? Okay, so more often than not, 9 times out of 10, fur. As I said last time, unless for is at the end of a sentence, I don't care what sentence it is. If for is not at the end, if it's not the last word, okay? If it is the last word, say for. If it's not the last word, the very last word, if it's not the last word anywhere else in the sentence, it can be pronounced as for, especially if you have a reason to stress it for some weird reason. Usually it's not, but it can come out as for, that's fine, but it will usually be pronounced as fur. So the answer, and if you're going to ask me blah, 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 for, and that's the last word, there's one answer, for. There's no option there. You have to say for, unless you want to sound uneducated. If the question is, how do I pronounce for in the sentence, and it's not the last word, the answer will be fur, but for is possible. Okay. It's always going to be the answer. Can a reduced function word like to or for be made high in pitch and or while the core of intonation unit? Okay. Can you explain how can an unstressed or reduced function word be pronounced within an intonation unit? Yeah, so I'm making the intonation lesson now. Hmm. Okay, let's think about how English works. Very basic. This isn't going to be complicated. Very basic. Okay, how does American English specifically work as a stress timed language? Right? Because just because it's stress time doesn't mean there's one way it has to work. But American English specifically as a stress timed language, how does it function? If you have a stressed syllable, it is louder. That's longer. It is louder. It is longer. It's usually, but not always, higher in pitch. Okay. So louder would be some more volume. That doesn't necessarily change the pitch, right? But when we tend to, right, 'cause in order to make that syllable or that particular word, right, 'cause it's maybe a fun, especially if it's a content word, like about, right? The second syllable is stressed, but that's still a function word. So uh, basics are the loudness comes from a little bit more voice, where the pitch actually is a sort of change in the highness or lowness of your voice, right? So where it's different than usual, right? So I'm not usually up here, la 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 la. I'm talking kind of higher, okay, blah 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 blah. It's not usually. I speak maybe more from here, right? But if I push out, push a little bit more volume, a little bit more pitch, okay, it makes you hear that word more, or that syllable more, makes it clearer. Okay. Now, if a word or syllable, especially a super common function word like to, is not stressed, right? Then it's going to be not just normal, but it's going to be even shorter and quieter. It's going to be really, really small. Whether that includes a reduction or not, that depends on the exact word. To usually reduces to t, so the vowel will reduce. But even if I say to, that doesn't mean it's stressed. That just means it's not reduced. So it still needs to be short, quiet. Okay, so it's not pronounced as long. This is relative. Okay, it's not like to do, to do. No, it's to do, to do. So they're relative to each other, but it needs to be shorter, it needs to be quieter, lower volume, and the pitch will not come up as much. Okay, so that should answer your question. Okay, if you just think about how American English works, can a reduced function word like to or for be made high in pitch and or the core of an intonation unit? Okay, so can it be made high in pitch? Technically, yes, if I stress it. Okay, so if I say, see, I'm trying to think of a case because there aren't a whole lot of cases necessarily where to or for would become stressed. For is maybe a little more likely, but uh, just hypothetically, let's say I say, uh, let's say we're talking about the difference between for and to, and the difference between the sentence give it for me and give it to me. Um, give it for me, just so we understand the meaning here first. Notice I just did that. Give it for me. Give it for me. Higher pitch, higher length, higher loudness. Why? In this particular case, normally in the flow of speech, if I say give it for me, give it for me, give it for me, give it for me, there's nothing special about for. In fact, it would probably be for. Give it for me, give it for me, give it for me. Okay. Um, but because I'm talking about what is the meaning of give it for me as opposed to give it to me. See, this is a good case when we're talking about the language itself. That is probably the most common time. Obviously, that's not necessarily normal speech, but that's probably the most common time where these little function words tend to get that extra spotlight, because we're comparing, okay, what's the difference in meaning between for compared to to? It's a contrast. Um, so that would be actually a good example. Okay. And just so you know, give it for me would be, instead of me giving something to someone, I want you to give it to them in my place. So it's still from me, but I'm not going to give it to them. You're going to give it to them because maybe I'm sick or something. If I say give it to me, that means you give it to me. It's coming to me. So I'm not giving it to somebody else through you. you're giving it to me. So there's very different meanings between for and to there. But in terms of the intonation, in the flow of normal speech, usually there's no reason to stress to or for. And so it would not be made high in pitch, because in order to make it high in pitch, you would stress it, right? Now for the core of an intonation unit, again, comparing, okay, what's the difference between give it for me and give it to me? I'm making it the core. Why? Because I'm contrasting for and to. So it naturally goes together. But no, like under normal circumstances, there's no reason, right? The whole purpose, the whole way that American English functions with the rhythm and the flow and all this stuff is that the function words, especially those single syllable function words, they don't matter very much. They're kind of just there, right? They still need to be there to be grammatically correct. But you don't need to hear them very well. Okay, they can kind of be blood, they can be reduced, they can kind of be slurred, they can be whatever. They don't need to stand out, okay, because they're not important, right? If I say, give Tom the dog, give Tom the dog, give Tom the dog. Okay, so it's like bam, bam, oh, little thing, bam, right? Now, if I say give Tom dog, it doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound grammatically correct. So we need it there for the grammar for it to sound good. But in terms of the intonation and the rhythm, we don't care that the is there. From the perspective of intonation and pronunciation, we don't care about the. In terms of grammar, we do, but not in terms of pronunciation and intonation. Okay, it's just, it needs to kind of be this little tiny thing that's there for the grammar. Okay, it's like whatever. Okay, we don't care because it's not content. We want to hear the content. What are you talking about, right? And then if you have a purpose to highlight one of those words, like to or for, like what's the difference between for me and to me? Now it's not necessarily like they're still function words, but there's a reason to highlight them. There's a reason to make them stand out. If you don't have a specific reason to make them stand out, that makes sense within the flow of the language, then they're not going to be the core of an intonation unit. They're not going to be high in pitch. They need to be small and out of the way. We want them out of the way. Okay. Can you explain how can an unstressed or reduced function word be pronounced with? Well, that's sort of I think I largely already addressed that with what I was just saying, but first I would want to know your understanding of an intonation unit, because I want to make sure we're on the same page there. That's actually not a term that I really use, but I'm pretty sure I know what you mean by that, because I've heard other people use that, and but sometimes there's misunderstandings. So if you can clarify what you mean by intonation unit, that would, just so I know we're on the same page. But otherwise, I think you are looking at intonation as something that is at least partially separate from like the pronunciation part of it, which if we go and break things down, okay, yeah, there's the formation of sounds, which specifically would be pronunciation, right? Usually when we talk about like learning pronunciation, that will include the sounds, the linking, the rhythm, the intonation. It kind of includes everything. But if we're talking what's the specific meaning of pronunciation, it's how you pronounce the sounds, right? So that does have a specific meaning, but it's also used as the category, like, English pronunciation includes all that technically. So, okay, we can say pronunciation if we're being specific, is the sounds themselves. Okay, then there's the linking and how sounds, change or drop or blend. That I don't really like. Okay, yeah, it is a thing, but to me, that still is under pronunciation. Because yeah, maybe if you say this word here and this word here separate, and then you say them next to each other, they blend, like what you, maybe the T and the Y become a CH, and so we're getting a different sound. And I can see how that might be a semi-separate thing, but it's still about the formation of sounds, right? And there's a reason why t and y become ch. It's not just some random thing like, oh, hey, because a t and a y are next to each other, let's just randomly change it into a ch. No, it's because the t is here, the y is here. There's a physical mechanical proximity that makes it very easy to blend them, and so it's actually part of the formation of sounds. It just happens to be sounds that are next to each other instead of individual sounds themselves. So there's that sort of flow aspect inside of word between words. Okay, that's fine. That's still very sound based, right? Then people talk about like, okay, there's the sort of the stress, the rhythm, the intonation, and this is a separate thing. And it's true. It is, in a way, it's not the same thing as the formation of the sounds, right? Because I could form the sound. Maybe I choose to say, instead of, I don't know, I say like come up with like some weird sound that doesn't exist in English, but I could still stress or unstress that. Okay, sure. So stress mechanics, rhythm mechanics, intonation mechanics, they're not the same as physical, the sound mechanics, how to form the individual sounds themselves. And that's fair enough, but everything goes together. Okay. Especially when we're talking about reductions, because reduction is part of stress. Okay. It's under stress. So if we're talking about stress, rhythm, and intonation, I don't want you to think of the intonation unit as something that is separate from like the flow of the language or from the rhythm of the language. Because it's not. The intonation actually is a byproduct of other mechanics. And as I'm going to be talking about in this big intonation masterclass I'm making, I'll go ahead and give you a nice big tip here. This is going to make a lot more sense once we go through the lesson itself. But for now, underneath everything that you say is a context, right? So if I say dogs, that's the context, right? I'm not talking about cars. I'm not talking about the president. I'm talking about dogs. Okay. So immediately within the words, we have a context, but the intonation is going to be rooted in that context. Okay. To a degree. So there's a context behind everything you say, whether we're talking about intonation or not. There's a context, and there's a purpose. There's a reason why you're saying something, even if you don't actually say something, right? Like if I say, hey, do you like dogs? And you say, okay, you're just making a sound, right? Now that particular response is not particularly clear of what you mean, but you could maybe respond that way. And there's still a reason, there's a purpose why you're making that sound in that particular way. Because I could go, or I could go, or I could go, See, even just that one sound. Now I'm changing the intonation of that sound, even though it's not actually like a sound in English. I'm just doing this little humming closed sound. Okay. But there's a reason rooted in the context. There's a purpose of why I'm expressing something with my voice. Okay. Maybe I'm hungry and I need to get food. So I say, hey, I'm hungry. Do you have any food? Right. There's a reason why I'm mentioning that. If I'm not hungry, I'm not going to talk about being hungry because I'm not hungry. Why would it come up? There's no reason. Right. Or it could be clarification. You think Tom lives in that house, but I want to correct you. I want to correct your understanding. No, that's not where Tom lives. Tom lives over there. Okay. There's a purpose for that. The context is, where does Tom live? The purpose for me saying something to you is to correct your understanding of where he lives. Okay. So there's always a context. There's always a purpose. The intonation is rooted in that context and purpose that is underneath every sentence, and it comes up through it. And then there's various ways, as I mentioned earlier, and as I'm going to talk more about in the lesson, there's 3 types of intonation. There's structural intonation, attentional intonation, and emotional intonation. And all 3 of these, structural is very grammar based. It kind of just, it generally works with the flow of the grammar. So it's just, yes, no, question, statement, whatever. We're going to talk about all that in the lesson. Attentional intonation is like the focus word and moving the focus word around based on the context and the purpose, right? So I say, no, Tom doesn't live there. Steve lives there. Tom lives over there. See, shifting that focus around instead of saying, Tom doesn't live there. Steve lives there. Tom lives over there. That's sort of just like default focus word, default focus word, default focus word. It sounds very It's like, yeah, I'm giving you the information, but using that intonation based on the context and the purpose, okay, that is what guides the intonation. So don't think of an intonation unit as something independent of itself. It's rooted in the context, it's rooted in the purpose, and comes out of that context and purpose, if that makes sense. Okay. And this is probably a very different, maybe not very different, but this is probably at least a bit different than the way that you've learned, from other sources, where, because I know a lot of sources, whether teachers or blogs or whatever, they kind of present this information in a very dry, like matter-of-fact way, like, oh, in this case, we do this, and in this case, we do that. And the reason why we do this is because of this, and this is, and then so you get this sort of like very static, like knowledge-based understanding instead of trying to feel it and understand why that is happening. So with intonation and stress, I think a lot of resources, just like with the description of a lot of grammar, they give you a description of things, and they don't really give you the underlying mechanism of why that is true, right? So you learn the knowledge of how it works, but then you don't really understand how to use it because it's not in you. It's just up here. Okay. My approach, whenever possible, is to try to get it in you instead of just have the theoretical understanding. So hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, then after I come out with the lesson, hopefully then it'll make sense. And if it still doesn't, then we can talk more about it. But okay. Do American native speakers know all possible or existing phrasal verbs in English? I would probably say no. So native speakers of any language don't know all the words in their language. It has nothing to do with Americans, and it's nothing to do with English specifically. But especially English speakers, I don't care if they're American or British or whatever, I don't care how educated you are, you do not know all the words in the English language, because there are at least 500,000 words. At least. Some people estimate there are over 1 million words in English. Some languages like Spanish that have relatively fewer words, maybe you can get closer to knowing all of them, but you're definitely not going to use all of them, because a lot of people you talk to won't even know some of those words, right? So when it comes to phrasal verbs specifically, the whole thing about phrasal verbs is that phrasal verbs are a spontaneous generation rooted in the mind of a native speaker. Generally, the way I define it is generally between a verb and a preposition to create a new meaning. Okay, if it doesn't create a new meaning, it's not a phrasal verb by my definition, which makes learning phrasal verbs a lot easier, by the way. But anyway, that's not the point. I've heard some phrasal verbs from, say, like British English speakers that I've never heard before, especially if it's based on like a verb that we don't really use, and then they combine that verb with a preposition. The underlying mechanics of how English works at a fundamental level, is still operating in British English and American English, but based on certain subtle differences here and there between, British language, the personality of British English, the language itself, not the people, and the personality of American English, because there's a general personality for the English language itself that is semi-independent of all the speakers. That's my theory, at least, and that's true of any language. Every language has its own personality. But then there's sort of further subtle subdivisions and colorings between like American English and British English. So we use certain words a little differently. We say on the weekend, they say at the weekend. It still works, but from an English or from an American perspective, saying at the weekend is just kind of weird and confusing, and because we don't use it that way. But the logic still works. It's just we don't. Anyway, that's not the topic here. It's getting way too complicated. Point is, within American English itself, I don't think there are any phrasal verbs that we don't know necessarily, but we also spontaneously generate phrasal verbs on the spot to fit the situation. That's how phrasal verbs started. And over time, many phrasal verbs became concrete and definable because they tend to be used regularly. But native speakers are still, on a regular basis, spontaneously generating phrasal verbs to fit certain situations. We don't do it like 24/7 every single day. And I'm horrible with specifics. I can't think of. I know there's at least one case that I've done that because I just don't remember what I said at the time, because this is when I was starting to think about all this. But I do know that we do that. So it's not just like, oh, these are phrasal verbs and they happen to exist and natives use them because they exist. No, they're spontaneously generated creations that got standardized, and we continue to spontaneously generate phrasal verbs based on the situation that we're in. So yeah, it's not about knowing phrasal verbs. It's about feeling what the verb is on a subconscious level, and feeling what the preposition is on a subconscious level and all the connections it has throughout the rest of the language. And the phrasal verbs just naturally happen as a result of that. And I've seen that happen with several students when I was developing the logic of prepositions approach. Not always correctly, but more often than not, they started to spontaneously generate correct phrasal verbs that they had never heard before, because they were starting to actually feel the prepositions themselves and how they work under the surface in the subconscious mind. So in this expression, let me know when you are home, are in a comma there, to be a little clear, but are in spoken language shouldn't be used, but instead it's contracted, or does it not matter for natives? Okay. So I remember how I've said many times that, like, okay, so to, right, the full pronunciation to, it doesn't mean it's stressed, but to with the oo sound is always possible. That's the fully enunciated form of the word, but usually it's to. Okay, it usually gets reduced. All a contraction is a reduction. A contraction is a type of reduction. Right? Now, conceptually, I think it is useful to think of them sort of like there's reductions, there's contractions. But if we actually look at what's going on here, like if I say you are, your, whether I say your or your, because we can further reduce your to your, either way, I'm dropping the sound. You are, your. Okay, dropping the ah. That's a reduction, right? And then I can further reduce the o, the or, into because it's not stressed, right? Words that have or that aren't stressed are almost always pronounced because that's just how things work. So you can say, let me know, the most natural way to say this would be, let me know when you're home. When you're home, you're. It's going to be the single most common way to pronounce it, because that's the contracted first reduction, and then reduced your to your second reduction. That's just the way we tend to say it. Can you say, let me know when you're home? Your. Yeah, nothing wrong with it. It's not likely. Perfectly fine, perfectly possible. You're not stressing it. Now, if you say your, it's a little more likely that you might do that because you're trying to stress it. Now, I could say, let me know when you're home. See, I don't have to unreduce it necessarily, but it's a more likely I say, let me know when you're home. So I'm undoing that second reduction, keeping the O sound and making it louder and longer, so that we have different degrees here. Now, if I uncontract, let me know when you are home. When you are home. There are some cases that if you don't contract in spoken speech, in the spoken language, if you don't contract, sometimes it will sound fine. It might sound like you're sort of emphasizing a little bit. Could just be maybe you're trying to speak really clearly. That's fine. But there are some other cases. This is actually more or less one of these cases. It's kind of on the line, but there are some cases where the contraction is so common that if you don't contract it in speech, it doesn't sound natural. It doesn't even sound grammatically correct. And this is almost one of those cases. It's kind of like if I say, let me know when you are home, when you are home. To me, it's kind of starting to sound a little bit like it's kind of unnatural. It's a little bit unnatural. It still works. It's fine, but it's kind of on that line where it's a little eh. So your question specifically is that if you're speaking, should you avoid are and only use the contracted form? And the answer to that, regardless of if it's you are, we are, the cats are, okay, it could be with nouns too, something that a lot of learners don't know. But regardless, in speech, formal, informal, doesn't matter. It's not about formality. It has nothing to do with formality. In speech, the answer is not that you should always say and drop the start of r. The answer is that what usually tends to happen and what will usually sound the most natural is to contract. Can it come out uncontracted? In most cases, yes. It's not a problem. Can you intentionally uncontract, especially if you're going to highlight the verb and emphasize it? Let me know when you are home. You need a special case for that, very special case in this case and for this sentence, but possible. Yes, you can do that. Okay, remember it's dynamic. So probably 95 to 99% of the time, if you have are, it will be contracted to in speech. Okay. In fact, even in writing, probably 80 to 90% of the time, we're going to write apostrophe re. Okay. And in fact, one of the functions of not writing apostrophe re in writing is because when I'm speaking, you can sort of hear the stress and the intonation. When I'm writing, you're trying to follow along based on the context and maybe how familiar you are with that person as a speaker. But if you're reading a book from somebody you've never heard, or an article from somebody you've never heard speak, there's going to be a certain voice in your head that will more or less follow what you know about English intonation stress, and you're going to be following along. And in writing, one way that we make, since you can't hear me say you are, right, we tend to write apostrophe re. And then if you actually see the word are, that's commonly a function of us telling your eyes, this needs to stand out, as if you were hearing it. Okay. That's not always the reason, but even in writing, there's a special reason not to reduce or not to contract, at least some of the time. Anyway, use your contractions. If you never use contractions, you will not sound natural, period. If you use contractions most of the time, you will sound very natural. And a quick note on nouns. So like if I said, the cats are big. Most of you probably think that that's perfectly fine. That's the way to say it. And you're not wrong, but it's not the only way to say it. In fact, a much more common way to say it is the cats are. The cats are big. Cats are big. Or if it's singular, the cat is big. The cat's big. Apostrophe S. The cat's big. Okay. It doesn't matter if it's a pronoun or a noun. More often than not, like 90+% of the time, we are going to contract. It's the way spoken speech operates. Not that it has to do that, but it tends to do that much more often than not. Okay. How do you pronounce? I'm technically out of time, and I'm way behind. What do I have to do today? I have to work on the intonation lesson. That's what I have to do today. I really should go. But I have so many things to answer. I think I need to add an extra half hour to these things because I keep running out of time. Okay. I am going to give another about 30 minutes or so to try to finish up here. It's partially my fault because I spend so long on each thing. It's also Wendell's fault for asking so many questions. That's fine. So I will attempt to catch up here. Please try not to ask any more questions. If you just want to say hi or leave a comment, like Joe here, I see Joe. Thank you for joining us and thank you for following. Or Zarpet99. Whoever is here, I'm going to try to catch up here. I'm going to have to go very soon. I should be going now, but I want to try to finish up here. So please, no more questions at this point. Okay. Do American native speak? Oh, I already did that one. Okay. How do you pronounce M as a weak one in the sentence? I am sorry. I don't know what you mean by weak. I assume maybe you mean either contracted or not fully enunciated. So you can say I'm. You can say I am. I am. Am usually reduces to M. With an S sound. I am. That's fine. Or you can say I am. It's fully enunciated clearly. I am. Okay. Yeah. So you could reduce am to M. Or you contract I'm, which we would usually do. Can I use the contraction? Can I use the contraction form of are in the sentence? Lots of people. Yeah, so exactly like I was saying, the cats are big. Lots of people are moving. Perfect. Very natural. That's the most common, normal thing that we will do in speech. Lots of people are moving. Perfectly fine. How to pronounce both words together? You got to be able to go from L to People or people, all half L, dark L, or, and you can do that by mastering mouth posture. It makes it a lot easier once you have the right mouth posture. In this sentence, I got in the office. Which one is stressed? Got or in? That's not the right question. So what are the stress words in the sentence? Got and office. Those are the two stressed words. Now, maybe you're asking for what is the focus word? What is the most stressed word? By default, usually that would be the last content word. So I got in the office. That gets the intonation. That gets the little extra pitch. Just a little extra pitch usually. I got in the office. I got in the office. Got in the office. Okay. If you put in, I got in the office. I got in the office. That sounds like you're clarifying something. Like instead of out of the office, you got into the office. So you need a very special case for that because in by default is not stressed anyway. So yeah. Thanks in advance for your contribution. No problem. Thank you for the questions. Well, even if a native speaker is speaking from a nose, see, now that sounds kind of weird. We say the nose. Because if you say a nose, that sounds like I could speak from this nose, I could speak from that nose, I could speak from that nose, right? So I would say the nose is like a general concept. Everybody has a nose, yes, but it's the nose because you only have your nose. Your nose is one specific. If you know anything about Plato and Plato's forms, right? There's like the nose, and then there's everybody has a specific um, instance of a nose, and we just refer to it as the nose as a concept. Um, the pure form of nose. If anybody knows philosophy, you're probably laughing right now, but even if they're speaking from the nose or in a nasal way, blah blah, they still sound relatively natural though. Exactly, yeah. It can sound kind of annoying, right? Like they'll still sound natural, they'll still sound American. It's just they'll have this extra sort of sound going on for whatever reason. Now it can kind of shift things a little bit out of place, but yes, they're still going to sound pretty natural. Bridgeco, yeah, I was going to talk about the Asian Americans too. Well, everybody has a different voice. Yeah, that's true. That's true. But there's so much more to the voice than the placing of it, you know, here, whatever. Like it's that. Anyway, we've already been over that. Sounds like Eminem. Sounds like who sounds like Eminem? I sound like Eminem. Somebody? I don't know what we were talking about when he made that comment. So, somebody sounds like Eminem. Okay. Well, thank you for the comment. Cubarius, something like that. Okay, don't worry about my name. Pronounce it as you see fit. You know it a couple times though. Yeah, I'm probably just gonna say Delio because that's what I've always said, and I don't want to take the time to think about how to say it correctly. Besides, I think I know that there's a point in like saying names the way, or at least trying to say the names in the way that they're pronounced in another language, because it's like, well, that's the person's name, right? Like your name isn't Delio, right? It's Delio. Okay. And I get that. But at the same time, different languages, right? Based on the sound system and the posture also, we're going to take something and we're going to pronounce it in a way that suits that language. Japanese does this all the time. Japanese has taken in hundreds, if not thousands, of English words and made them into Japanese pronunciation, right? Some of them sound almost exactly the same. Many of them sound quite different. Like Mike sounds very similar. Mike, meaning like a microphone, right? Short for microphone. But then there's many other cases where it's like, okay, yeah, you can kind of hear it in there if you listen, but it sounds very Japanese no matter what you do, because it's adapted into the Japanese pronunciation. So I do think that as English learners, or as whatever language learners, in this case English, me pronouncing your name in a more English way, sort of like, I mean, maybe you already know how your name is pronounced in English, right? But I think it just sort of reinforces like, oh, this is what I should expect to hear from natives, right? Now, sometimes there's variation. Like I could say Delio, I could say Delio, right? If you say, hi, my name's Delio, right? I say, oh, hey, Delio, or hey, Delio. Maybe I'll say it that way. It just sounds a little more like English mouth posture. But I like Delio. Yeah. Anyway, oh my God, you sound cool. Doing what? What did I do? I'm so lost. Nothing. Hello. They sent me a letter spelling out the details of the agreement. In the sentence, the spelling out of the details of the agreement part is the description of the word letter we want. Or it implies how the sending action was done. Grammar. Okay. The spelling out, I like the word the there. That's very natural, very nice. So spelling out, not necessary though. Spelling out the details of the agreement part is the description. I guess it is necessary since you put part. But anyway, is the description of the word letter. Okay. Sent me a letter Spelling out the details of the. Okay, I see. Description of the word letter. Or it implies how the sending action was done. Okay, good question. The first one. The second one, I see how you can kind of look at it that way, but it doesn't really make sense. It just, that's one way to interpret it, but it doesn't make sense in this context. I'm not even going to try to explain that because I don't even have time, but I know we're on the same page here. So yeah, it's the description of the letter. I'd say they say, you can also say, right, they sent me a letter which, or that, spells out the details of the agreement. That would be another way to say exactly the same thing, but we're using that ing form with that phrase to describe it instead of making it a separate clause with which or that. So it's just two different ways to say the same thing. Yeah. But yeah, that ing form can be used to describe the way something was done. And so I see why you have that question. Yeah. It's just, in this case, we're going to count on the context to figure out how to interpret that. That's a very high level grammar question. That's a good question. I think one of the things that creates artificial deep sound is the fact that as you lower your larynx, the soft palate tends to raise as well, creating even more space of resonance. Yes and no. Yes and no. That's probably part of the actual mechanics of what's going on. But if your jaw is a little bit more closed and your tongue is pushed forward, you have naturally less space through here, right? This is kind of pulled up a little bit. You have less space in here. You have less space in here. And so what happens, the throat is a good place to examine what happens with space, because if I push it out like this, it sounds deeper, even though I'm not going down, I'm going out. Or if I pull it in like this, it sounds restricted, right? Even it might sound a little bit higher compared to my normal voice, a little bit higher kind of. Even though I'm going back, I'm not going up. So pulling in will create effect of maybe a little bit of a higher sound, but mostly a restricted sound. So even if things aren't like to the point of super restriction, if you have less space through here, it's naturally going to create a slight higher sound. There's going to be less space for resonance, so it's not going to sound as deep. And so when you do start opening up, your voice might sound slightly deeper. That does happen, very slightly. It's a little shift. But to get that artificial deepness, there's different ways that you can manipulate that. Like, I could speak from down here. I could speak from out here. I could speak normally and just tense certain muscles up around here to kind of get a little bit of a deeper voice. There's all kinds of subtle little things that you can do to get that artificial deepness. And you can still have a generally good posture, but just have some extra tension going on here that is making that voice deep in a way that at least the average American, if nothing else, wouldn't have that tension there affecting their voice. So yeah, it's a potential explanation, something that can't explain it for sure. Is the sentence correct? The American and European economies are going to be leveled come winter. Blackouts and food scarcity will run rampant and devastate the population. Yes. You might be questioning the American and European economies. Why it's plural? That's because it's two economies going to be leveled come winter. Leveled, yes. That's a little creative, a little advanced. And then we have come, right? So when winter comes, you can say come something. It's another way to say it. It's a special use of the word come. Going to be leveled, so it's like destroyed, right? If you blow up a building, like in demolition, right? It's like they put the explosives, they do the thing, and it collapses. That's called, we're leveling the building, right? Because instead of standing out from the ground, now it's at the ground, ground level, so it's leveled. So the economy is going to be leveled, so it's going to be destroyed. It's going to come down, come winter, right? So when winter comes, it's going to be destroyed. Blackouts and food scarcities will run rampant. So rampant means like crazy, run rampant. Doesn't have to actually be running. It's abstract. So there will be a lot of blackouts and a lot of food scarcity all over the place. It'll be like crazy chaos and devastate their population. So basically, this is just saying that in Europe and America, Um, we're going to the dark ages. Maybe not quite that strong, but we're going into the dark ages because of our economies collapsing. That's what this is saying. I hope not. Really hope not. But that would be in line with my prediction for the last 5 years. So let's hope I'm wrong. Yes, I do speak Arabic. Okay, good. The problem is you can't probably know unless you hear me speaking because Arabic has 28 accents more or less. That's a lot. I thought English had a lot of accents. Yeah, obviously Arabic has a very long history, lots of, there's this whole region of the world where it's spoken, and so lots of variation. Yeah. So there's sound we have that only exists in one word. Interesting. That seems a bit much, but that might be like some archaic leftover from like historical reasons. It's like for some reason you just like kept that sound in that particular word, and it's like still in the modern language. That's what I would imagine is happening there. But I'm a Spanish speaker from South America and never heard the word zapote. Well, then there you go. He did say it's a tropical fruit. So maybe a lot of South America is quite tropical. But maybe you're from an area that isn't tropical. I don't know. I always struggled when I had to pronounce my R's because Maria. Welcome, Maria. Sorry, it took me a second to get to you. I'm backlogged, but I'm here. Hopefully you're still here. I always struggled when I had to pronounce my R's because I always use the British R because it's much easier. And if I try to Americanize it, I tend to just roll the R's in a wrong way. Also, I've noticed that Americans tend to make their mouths vibrate much more and others while they speak. Do you notice a difference when you speak other languages? Any tips to achieve it? Okay, so yeah, interesting question, interesting insights. The way to get the R or any sound, but especially a difficult sound like a difficult sound like the dark L, which I call the half L vowel, difficult sound like or the TH sounds, right? These are common problems for a lot of English learners. The trick to get any sound, no matter how similar or different it is from your native language, is first to get the right mouth posture. I've already mentioned mouth posture several times today, and I'll keep mentioning it until I die. Mouth posture, mouth posture, mouth posture. And the R is a perfect example. I mentioned this before, but very briefly. So going from English to Spanish, especially American English to Spanish, American English has much more open posture, spoken more from like the center of the mouth. Some people are a little bit farther back. It's okay, but generally from the center of the mouth, a bit more open. Now, what happens if I try to roll R's like in Spanish, right? Single tap is not too bad. We kind of more or less do that with the flat D. But if I want to right, trill it, how can I do that when my mouth is so open? Okay, you might think it might not make a big difference. It makes a huge difference. It took me 6 months with knowing nothing about posture. When I was first teaching myself Spanish, it took me 6 months to just start being able to do this. Not even master it, not be able to do it all the time. Right? I never mastered it actually. At some point, if I go back and improve my Spanish, I'm going to master it, especially master the whole posture now that I know about mouth posture. But if I try to say CARRO, right? Okay, but I use American posture. My mouth is like this. Spanish mouth is like this. Okay, it's a little more closed. It's not a big difference objectively, but in terms of the quality of the sounds and how things flow through the vocal tract, it makes a huge difference. It just doesn't look like much from the outside. So my mouth is a little more closed. Of course, the tongue is also pushed slightly forward because Spanish is generally spoken from up here. Okay, American English is generally spoken from here, lower. So if I want to but I'm here, that's really hard to do. But if I close my mouth a little bit more, if I push my tongue slightly forward, and then if I just I don't even really have to try to trill the R, especially when I'm singing. I've noticed that once I start to shift that posture more into a Spanish posture, almost anytime that there's a rolled R, not only do I not have to try, but it wants to happen. It just wants to da, 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 da. Okay. Even to the point that sometimes a single R, like if I say amor, which that was also American posture, you can maybe hear it's very open. Amor, more. See, my mouth is very, very open there. I have a different center of gravity. I'm holding it here instead of up here. But anyway, regardless of that, even if I want to do a single R, when I'm singing and I try to get that posture in place, sometimes it will naturally actually become more than one, like it'll become a trilled R. And I've noticed that from natives as well. Like there's a song by Camila where I think it's that actual word where they say, he says something like blah, 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 amor, and it comes out as like amor, whatever. I don't have that posture in my speech yet, but you get the point. Anyway, it's much easier to do sounds. The biggest reason why certain sounds are difficult, this isn't the only reason, but I think the biggest reason, if I could give one single biggest reason why some sounds are difficult in a new language, it's because you don't have the right posture. Okay. Your mouth is, depending on what language you're coming from and going to, your mouth is either too open or too closed. Your tongue is either too pushed forward or not pushed forward enough. Your throat is either too tight or too relaxed. Okay. So for me going into Spanish, things need to be more closed, more pushed forward, a little tighter, and the Spanish will kind of flow better. If you're going from Spanish to English, particularly American English, you want to open up a bit more, relax here a bit more, get the tongue a little bit lower, not push forward, settled back and down, not pushed back and down, settled back and down. You have to get rid of that tension that you have in your native posture. And then from there, now that by itself will not just magically produce a good for you, but you're in position to then build that instead of trying to force it through your posture, especially the R. If you don't, the R is very tight and closed up here. If your mouth posture is already more closed and your tongue is pushed here and you're trying to do this, you don't have a lot of space. So of course, and in fact, actually, I was amazed. I was listening to a Shakira song like 2 days ago, yesterday, 2 days ago, very recently. And she was singing in English, right? The whole song was in English. It was one of her English songs. And it was amazing to me because I could actually hear when she would do her R's, like when she would say heart or dark, I could hear her Spanish posture because now her pronunciation in English is quite good overall, but when she does the R's, it really gives her away. And I can tell that she's maybe a little pushed forward. She's a little too close. And so she doesn't have enough space to do the R. So instead of saying like heart, she says more like heart, heart, heart. And maybe she can get into the ah part, but I'm trying to focus on the here. It's like a really shallow, slightly pushed forward, like instead of okay, creates a slightly different quality. And because I've been working so much with people on mouth posture, my ears are really getting tuned to these subtle little differences. And I'm actually more and more able to hear the posture through someone's pronunciation, through their speech. And it's just amazing to me. And it convinces me even more that this mouth posture is like the key to mastering the pronunciation in another language. So anyway, so my biggest tip for you would be go learn mouth posture. I have a playlist that you can just type in like English Hacks mouth posture. I have a video introducing the concept. I have phase 0, which helps you to start to break your mouth posture and just get basic control over different parts of the vocal tract. It's not about American English specifically, but it's the single most important pronunciation lesson that you will ever watch. Several people have told me that I've been working with. They're like, yeah, this is the work that, like, some people have been working 10 years on their pronunciation, and they say the phase 0 material was the key to help me start getting these things. So anyway, you go to phase 0. I don't know why I'm doing this. You go watch phase 0, do the exercises. Don't just blah, blah, blah. No, you have to master those exercises, pass the checkpoints, do the phase 1 lesson. That'll help that'll help you to start building the American posture. Okay, so phase 0 breaks your posture, gets control over the vocal tract so you can not be in your posture, you have more control over what you're doing. Then phase 1, you take what you now can do with your vocal tract and you start forming that basic American posture, a little bit more open, schwa sound. You have to pass the checkpoints there. Once you do that, you're on to phase 2, which I do not have a lesson for yet because I'm still exploring and developing techniques with students for that. So you have to wait for that one, but start with phase 0. And trust me, even if you do nothing else, even if you completely ignore the entire mouth posture concept, the work in phase 0 is going to give you so much more awareness and control over your vocal tract. That alone will allow you to produce a better R, just by itself, even if you don't use the right mouth posture, because you're going to be able to manipulate things better in order to create a better sound. So phase 0 is the key. Okay. Also, I've noticed that Americans tend to make their mouths vibrate much more. So this is very vague when people talk about like vibration and where the vibration is coming from. And it's not necessarily the most useful thing, I don't think. Especially here, like I'm not completely sure what you mean by make the mouth vibrate. Like, how do you make the mouth vibrate more or less? So maybe are you talking about like maybe there's more resonance in the mouth? That's probably what you mean. And if that's the case, that is relatively true. Why? Because there's more space. If you have more space, you have more resonance. If you have less space, right, there's less space for the sounds to resonate in. And so it feels squeezed, it feels restricted. So again, I could do that with my throat, I could do that with my mouth. If I do it with my throat, there's different ways that I can kind of do this, but either way, you can kind of hear, right? I'm closing that pipe, right? And from different places in different ways, creates a restricted sound. Okay. If I push it out, I'm not pushing down, my voice is getting a little deeper because there's more resonance, there's more openness in the throat. So we get a deeper resonance, right? Fuller vibration, I guess. You go in the mouth. If I hold my mouth like this, I'm still trying to produce all the same sounds, but you can already hear, like, number one, I don't have enough space for American English. So kind of blah, 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 blah. Sounds a little unclear, but just the quality of my voice, it sounds restricted. It sounds tighter because there's not as much space to vibrate in here, like you're saying, right? So to resonate. But what happens if I open my mouth more? Okay, now there's more space. So we have a little bit more space in here. We have a little bit more space in here. We have a little bit more space in this back corner area compared to many other languages, which tend to have one or more of those be more closed or more tense. And so you are correct there. So wow, how you fix that? Number one, open the mouth, right? You're going to do that in phase 1, right? That's going to teach you how to get your jaw a little bit more open and hold it there, practice holding it there. The in American English, the reason why it sounds American compared to like the British schwa sound, is that our mouth posture is more open. So it creates a little bit of a different quality of that schwa sound. So anyway, that would be my tips: mouth posture, mouth posture, mouth posture, mouth posture. Okay, so we must focus on the language, and our brains must focus on English songs. And we can repeat "singer," my special tactic. Okay, so yeah, so singing along is very useful, very good. I'm way over time now. I appreciate everybody for not asking a bunch of more questions, so I can try to finish this. Thank you very much. Music is extremely good for a lot of things in language learning. Music is a very powerful tool for language learning, especially for vocabulary, especially for grammar. It's not, in my opinion, it's not the best tool for pronunciation because we do things in singing that we don't do in speaking. Like holding things out really long or modulating our intonation, our voice or intonation in ways that we wouldn't do in speech, right? So obviously the basic underlying pronunciation is there. The basic underlying stress mechanics and everything are still there. But if we're talking about pronunciation specifically, I don't think that music is the best resource. For some things, maybe like the rhythm, it can be, yes. This is just my opinion. I know other people think that music is great for pronunciation. I don't think it's the best personally. But for the language overall, definitely music is super, super, super useful. But there are ways that you can improve your pronunciation through music as well. As long as you're just aware of the things that are kind of like special to music, you can just like say, okay, yeah, that's kind of a music thing, right? And yeah, like for example, like say getting a tapped R in Spanish, like a single tapped R. If I'm singing along with somebody, like that's a particular sound that I can practice producing as I'm singing. That's perfectly fine. That's good practice. So depends on exactly what we're talking about. But what sound is it when people pronounce to as duh? Is it a dental D or TH? No, absolutely not. It's a flat D. Now that depends. Does it depend? Okay, so if remember that the only time I want you to drill this into your brain. Okay, it's very important. Drill this into your brain. The only time, I don't care if it's normally a T, I don't care if it's normally a D, I don't care if it's a T changing into a D, like in this case with two. I don't care. Okay. It has to be, whether it's a flap D or not a flap D, it doesn't matter if it's flaps or not. If it's a T or a D, it cannot be the dental version, period. Period. Okay. The dental T and D are only used for THs. They're only used to replace the THs. Okay. Is the T and 2 a TH? No. Is the D that the T turns into a TH? No. It turns into a D, not a TH. Otherwise, it would be a TH, right? It turns into a D. Remember, dental D in American English has nothing to do with a D. Linguistically, from a sort of a meta perspective outside of English, you can think of it as a type of D. Yes, because like in Spanish, the, okay, it's a flatter D sound. But within the context of English, the is not a D sound. Okay? That's the thing you want to get into your head. In English, within the context of English, not meta, not linguistically speaking overall, comparing different languages. In the scope and context of English, the, and specifically American English, the is only a TH sound. That's not linguistically accurate from a broader perspective, but within English, within American English, the is not a D sound. So it will never replace a D sound, with one exception. The only exception, the only time that you can make a regular t or a regular duh, even if it would normally flap like here, changing T into the D like that. Which actually there's variation there. We're going to talk about that in a second. But regardless of if it's a T or a D or what kind of D or whatever it is, the only one exception time where you can change that into a dental form is if the sound before it is a TH, voiced or voiceless. It doesn't matter. So if I say, let's see here, the path to freedom. Okay. The path to freedom. Now there, path, voiceless. So I'm not going to change the T into a D. There's no reason, right? Because part of what triggers the D is the sound before it is voiced. So it's going to say a T, but instead of saying, because I'm already doing the dental T for path instead of path, right? So I'm using that version. So instead of going path to, there's no reason to do that. Okay, we do path to. So it gets released as a dental T only because we're already in that position from the TH before it. Okay. That is the only time that a regular T or D in English can be pronounced as a dental T or D. Otherwise, the dental T or D in American English is not a T or D sound. It is a TH sound. Okay. And the only reason why we're able to release the T or D as the dental version when there's a TH before it is because of the mechanics. Just like T and Y are close to each other and they blend into Ch, same reason. T and, well, the dental T is here for the TH path. And then because the dental T technically does kind of sound like a T anyway, and the regular T would be right here, we could just release it from there. It makes it easier to speak into flow. So it's a proximity, it's a physical mechanic thing that makes that possible, only in that case. Now the T changing into a D, if the sound before it is a vowel, it becomes flapped. It's a flap D. Okay, never a dental D, it's a flap D. So if I say go da, that's not here, not go da, see, go da. I'm trying to keep my same mouth posture, my same sounds. That immediately gives me an accent just by trying to like push it here. Go da. No, go da, da. Okay. If the sound before it is voiced, but not a vowel, like, I think we have a good example here. Love and to, right? I would love to go. Love to. Now we can't flap it because there's no vowel before it. We need that vowel to trigger the flap because we need the vowel before and after. But because the sound before it is voiced, again, this is special for the preposition too. Because the sound before it is voiced, we can still use that D, but it's just going to be a regular weak D. Okay, it's not here. It's not love the. If you do it here, it sounds like you're saying love the. And this is a big important reason why you cannot replace a normal T or D with the dental T or D. Because to an American's ears, the dental T and D is not a T and D. It is a TH sound. Within the context of American English, our brains will interpret it as a TH sound. So love the dental is interpreted as love the. But if I say loved using a regular D placement, changing the T and 2 into a weak D, loved, that gets interpreted as love to. So hopefully that makes sense. I want you to drill that into your brain. Okay, think about it not from the general linguistics context. Think of it as within the context of American English, what a native speaking American, how their brain would interpret that dental sound. It will always be a TH. It will always be interpreted as a TH sound. Okay. And again, through mechanical proximity, you can release a T or a D from that position if you're already in that position from a TH sound. It's the only time that it can be released from there. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense. The pure form of the nose, or the nose hood, the nose hood. We actually call it the noseness. The noseness. That would probably be what we would say. The noseness. Hood kind of works too, but I think noseness we would say. Yeah. Not to be confused with nasality, of course. Okay, good. Finally, way over time. I definitely have to go. I need to figure out what to do. Like maybe I can explain things quicker or shorter or whatever, but I don't know. But thank you guys very much for allowing me to catch up. Thank you for coming and watching and asking questions and hanging out. We will be here again next week, of course, Sunday, 11:30 to approximately 1:30 California time. And have a great week. As I said, I will try to, by tonight, I will try to get minimal pair extra practice lesson up tomorrow at the latest, just so you have something while I continue to work on the intonation lesson. And hopefully by next weekend, the intonation lesson will be done. I'm super excited about it, trying to work hard on it. So look forward to that. And I'll see you guys next week.